Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Porter Anderson. I am editor-in-chief with Publishing Perspectives. We are the news medium of Frankfurt Book Fair. And if the bookseller, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is the trade magazine of record for the UK, we are the trade magazine of record for everywhere else. So I hope you'll come and see us frequently. We are constantly talking international. We have a fascinating program here today. And what I'm going to do is ask each of our participants to introduce themselves with a couple of lines, rather than watching your eyes glaze over as I read their bios to you. We have a very, very interesting topic that we're all excited about because there are, as you are probably aware, signs that translation is rising in the market, that there is actually new interest, more interest. Nielsen Book has discovered this in its latest statistics here in the UK. And in the US, HarperCollins is actually opening a new division called Harper Via. It's being announced today for translation. And so we're glad to see that more and more is coming online. As you know, this area is sponsored by Amazon Crossing, which is the largest of the translation imprints. They are part of Amazon Publishing. And we have a representative from Amazon Publishing with us here today. She's one of our two Laurens. In the center of the table here, you see, closest to me, Lauren Edwards from Amazon Publishing. And next to her, Lauren Hook from the Feminist. Then closest to me is Roland Glasser. He is with the Starling Bureau. And many of you know, I'm sure, Daniel Hahn, translator and author, who is on the far end from me. And so I'm going to be quiet now and let each of them give you a few lines about themselves, and then we'll get into our topic. Roland?
Okay, so my name's Roland Glasser. I'm a translator from French to English.
I don't think your mic's on.
Oh, hello?
Yeah?
Hello?
Yeah.
Testing? No?
Try this one.
Hello? Ooh! So, my name is Roland Glasser. I'm a translator from French to English. And I'm a founding member of the Starling Bureau, which is a translators collective, and we operate a bit like an agency, and we pitch books to publishers.
Is this one on? Oh, good. Hi, everyone. As Porter mentioned, my name is Lauren Edwards, and I'm the translation program manager at Amazon Crossing, which, as he said, is one of the largest publishers of translations in the U.S. My role is really to act as an ambassador for the global translator community. I also work very closely with our editorial team, and in the past I've been on the marketing team, so lots of different perspectives.
My name's Lauren Hook. I work at the Feminist Press in New York. The Feminist Press is a nonprofit publisher founded in 1970. So next year is actually our 50th anniversary, which is very exciting. We publish new and classic writing from around the world. We've always very much believed in global feminisms. And as my role as senior editor, I'm looking to acquire more translations than we have been doing, but also looking farther and really deeper for more underrepresented languages, but also populations, to bring those to the States.
Hello, my name's Daniel Hahn. I'm a translator from Portuguese, Spanish and French, as well as a writer and an editor. I've published about 60 books of various different kinds, and worked also in a number of organizations that promote translation, translated literature, writing, free expression, and so forth.
Excellent. Thank you all. Now, Lauren Edwards and I have a secret name for this panel. We call it the Sell panel. But as she's going to remind us, success is not all about money. Yes, it is. What we are on about here is how to promote translation, because especially with this energy that seems to be coming into it, perhaps because of the political climate, I don't know. The fact that people are more interested suddenly in reading other cultures is good. We would like to take advantage of it. And so, in a digital world, how do we, in fact, do a better job of promoting translation? Lauren Hook, could I start with you? Because you mentioned social media in some of the comments we were making earlier. And that is the first thing that occurs to people, I think, in terms of digital and what we can do. Talk to us a little bit about your experience with social.
Sure. Well, at Feminist Press, we're pretty small. There's about 6 of us, and we're a nonprofit, so we do the book publishing, but also the developmental work. And so, even though I'm an editor, I'm involved in production, but I'm also involved in crafting the marketing and publicity campaigns for our books. And I have to say I'm a huge convert to Twitter. Didn't used to be, and I have a Twitter now that I use mainly for work purposes. And if authors and translators are willing, don't want to force it upon anyone, but I would really consider engaging with the literary community on Twitter. Simple things, even on Instagram, like hashtag women in translation. You can just connect with a readership that you didn't know existed. I see feminist press books being read, all over the world just because of that hashtag. It pops up on my Instagram feed. So I encourage, burgeoning translators to follow, the translators that they see getting published, working in the same languages as them, support them, retweet them, DM them, follow the publishers that you want to be working with that are publishing the kinds of books that you want to be publishing, and, reach out, get to know their list more intimately, get to know those editors and their tastes more intimately. And I think, that's a really great way to, at least establish and touch base with the community that really is growing, as you said, Porter.
I agree with you. I think I knew Danny probably better on Twitter for about a year and a half before we ever were in direct touch. I meet some of my favorite people on Twitter, particularly in the translation world, so I can vouch for that. Roland, I want to ask you, because you were talking to me about wanting to bring the physical world and the virtual world of Twitter, of social, together. Tell us about that.
Well, I think that there's been a bit of a swing back from everything is going to be digital, the future will be digital, to people wanting something real world, something physical. And it seems to me that there are many more events that are organised, be they book launches or readings or meeting with authors, that happen in the real space, but also happen as well on digital. They are promoted online, you can book online, people live tweet, there are blogs that are written around them, they are maybe recorded, and that content goes online. And I think that the boundaries between those two are a lot more blurred than they used to be, because we have the whole world in our pockets on our phone, and so we're constantly moving between these two spaces, and I think that's really quite interesting.
Lauren Edwards, talk to us about how you guys connect with consumers, particularly those interested in translation.
Oh, good question.
It brings in a lot of social.
Absolutely. And I think, at a very basic level, we think about success and connecting with consumers as connecting books with the right readers. And that sounds like such a simple concept, but it's actually one that's been fundamentally changed with the advent of technology and digital avenues for promoting translations. Let's start with readers. When we talk about readers of English translations, many people think of the US market, the UK market, maybe some others, when in fact there's a huge global readership in English in many markets that maybe you don't think of as traditionally. And we are able to connect with those readers through digital avenues and have them explore the same books that we're reading in the US, same books that we're reading in the UK. So when we think about which books to translate, which books will resonate with English readers, it's helpful to think that it's a global question. It's a global issue, not just kind of the more Anglophone sphere that we have traditionally thought of. At the same time, when you think about success, you think about finding the book that will be a success. And that is easier than it ever has been in a sense, because we have access to the whole world. It is easier to research today and find those books that were maybe harder to access 20 years ago. We've tried to institutionalize this on our team with our open submissions website. We have an online form that anyone in the world can go on and submit books for us to consider for English translation, which has been fantastic. And it has just opened up this world of possibilities. So this kind of fundamental question of how do we find the right books that could be a success, how do we translate them, and then how do we connect them with readers? It is an entirely different global question than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So I think in terms of thinking about successful strategies, having that global perspective in mind is very helpful.
Yeah, you're right about that. How successful would you say that you guys are at this point in accessing this, and how far along in the process? Because I think there must be acres to go, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant learning process, right? But I think we've seen great success. Last year we released a memoir from a man who had escaped North Korea, right. A River in Darkness. And, we were very pleased with the reader response in the US and in the UK, but we also got some great media interest in India, as an example.
Right.
So, we are starting to see traction, seeing the ways that reader response and promotional opportunities do have this global spread.
Yeah. I'll tell you something that I like about what Amazon Crossing has done under Gabriella Page-Fort's direction. They have made a tremendous move in taking what we all think of as literary translation beyond literary work. Now, I love to read literary myself, but many people are reading genre, of course. Many more people are reading genre, unfortunately, than literary. And one of the things Gabby is smart enough to have done is to find very high-quality genre work and translated it so that we are pulling a new audience into translation. Not just the literary readers, but mystery readers, crime readers, even a little romance, I think, every now and then. Yes, my God. But it's working because they're walking in the door. They're starting to read something from another culture. And if that's the way to bring them into translation, I'm all for it. And so it's one of the, to me, it's one of the smartest things that Amazon Crossing has done. Danny, you were talking about wanting to, if you can, figure out how to promote translation as a kind of global idea, as a larger entity than just a single book at a time, right?
Right. I think a lot of translators do that. I think we do use social media or blog tours or whatever it may be to promote individual titles in the same way that an author does. But I think it's, in some ways, particularly at this moment when we're beginning to see the expansion of a potential readership, it's a very useful mission for us to have. It always sounds slightly kind of evangelical, but it is a bit like that. A very useful mission to be able to think about how we can promote translation as a practice, and also translation as a category, if that's a meaningful thing. So it's not just, I don't think we've just seen several individual titles doing very well recently. I think what we've seen is publishers who wouldn't have published translation at all publishing translation now. People are seeing it not as a prohibitive thing. People are seeing it as not as a category that is frightening. And what you're describing that Amazon Crossing is doing in publishing genre is very useful. And other publishers, I mean, crime in translation has been doing much better than most other things for quite a long time. But it's very useful to be able to say, not just, we think you should read this individual book because, but to get people to understand that there is an entire, 94% of the world that doesn't have to be frightening and doesn't have to be exclusive. And that's about talking about the big general things, talk about the practice, talk about the category of international writing, and not just saying, this is a book I'd like to sell you and it's $6.99.
How well do you think your other translators, your colleagues, understand and agree with this process? Or do they think more in a one-by-one mentality? We could all fall into that at some point, of course, according to what project
I think in a funny way,
you're
I think
on.
most translators are probably do much more to promote the profession and the craft than they do to promote individual work.
Right.
Promoting individual work is something we can sometimes do, and we work with a publicist at the publisher to say, if you're doing an event program, I'll do that. If you're doing a blog tour, I can be one of the parts of that. But actually, most of us spend most of the time, not least because as a translator, you'll be, instead of a novelist who publishes a novel every 2 years, we'll be doing 3, 4, 5 books a year. That actually there's a lot of in-between time when we're still talking about the profession, we're still talking about the craft, we're still running workshops for other translators or for students, or doing things in primary schools or at universities or on the radio. I think there's a huge amount that translators are doing to, I don't know whether it's demystify or to mystify, but simultaneously both of those things make people understand that it's not magic, but it is nonetheless quite interesting and complex, the process, and that international literature is an enormously rich and enormously enormous pool of stuff that you may want to read, quite apart from the fact that I happen to have a front listing which I'm shilling for now, and I happen to have a copy in my bag.
Right. Well, you've been a great proponent of this with the competition that you've established, and you're leading a tour to Bologna, yeah?
I am. I'm taking 10 children's publishers to Bologna this year. Probably, because it's on the 1st of April, and I have no idea which continent we'll be on the 1st of April. Assuming we are on something resembling the same continent as Italy, I'm taking 10 children's publishers to Bologna for 3 days to go shopping, essentially.
It's fantastic. What else, I mean, what will you do while you're there? Are there special programs arranged for them, or is it just an exploratory venture?
I've arranged a few things, but mostly they're sorting it out for themselves. What I didn't want to do is set up one of those programs where I kind of parade them past a different publisher every half hour. Right. Partly because, which happens a lot. There'll be a tour to Lisbon to meet Polish publishers, or a tour to Warsaw and Krakow to meet Lisbon to meet Portuguese, and You know where Lisbon is, right? Yeah. Right. It's the one in Portugal. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. And actually, I wanted to do something quite different, partly because I'm taking 10 publishers who are looking for very different things, but also because actually one of the functions of this trip is not just for them to go and buy loads of stuff. It's for them to make their own new friends and make some contacts and meet people from whom they might not buy something, but from whom they'll buy something 4 Bolognas from now, because that's also how it works. You don't go to a book fair, have 34 meetings and buy 34 books. Right. You go to a book fair, you have 34 meetings, and then half a dozen of those are people you will be meeting at Frankfurt for the rest of your life. Always first meeting on Tuesday, you'll have the same, And so what I want them to do in Bologna actually is I'm helping them in little ways if I can, but actually what I want them to do is start making their own connections and start wandering around and discovering that there are things happening in the halls which are not the Anglophone halls, and get excited. And I said to them at the very, very first meeting we had planning the Bologna trip, it's completely fine if you don't buy anything.
Right, of course.
My main metric of success of this project is not for them to acquire. My main metric of success is for them to have an international list when they are senior commissioning editor some years from now.
Right. Exactly.
But I think that just beginning to understand that there is all this stuff there, that it's not frightening, that given that it's 94% of the world who doesn't speak English, the odds are there's something good.
Yeah.
Because it will be weird if we were the only people publishing the good stuff. And beginning to make them understand this. I'm not saying to them, here are 5 books you should be publishing. I'm not saying to them, everyone's got to publish books from Lisbon and Poland or wherever I'm sending them to, right. But making them understand that there is scope for them to discover stuff for themselves. It's a whole category, and this category is 94%.
So it's
of the
their
world.
First meeting with the people they're going to meet with the rest of their lives.
That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping.
That's great. That's
a
terrific.
Really, really high risk dating project.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's great. It sounds terrific. Lauren Hook, tell me about at Feminist Press what you're doing with pre-publication promotion.
Sure. I mean, every book is different. We publish a lot of books that the authors are deceased, in which case the translator is really the best advocate anyway to speak on behalf of the book. But it also depends, whether the author is alive, but also their willingness to generate more content, in lead up for a book. So I have a book publishing next week from Croatia. It's called Mars by Asja Bacic. It's a collection of speculative fiction, and it's a debut in English. Very exciting. The translator is Jennifer Zobel, and excitingly, they were both really thrilled to do whatever we asked of them. So Asja not only wrote a piece. A lot of the characters in the short story collection talk about writing as women, and so she wrote her own kind of like room of her own based piece that was placed on LitHub, I believe. And then she also is generating a list of underrated writers, up and coming writers from Croatia, and that's something we can share on Publishers Weekly. Jennifer Zobel is also interviewing her. There's lots of different ways that you can place content. So I think thinking about content generation beyond just the book, obviously you would want an excerpt of some kind, asymptote, Words Without Borders. And that's pre-pub, but it's also in the lead up, right? So even if you don't have a publishing contract, you should be trying to get as many bylines and as many hits, basically, for your author and for you and for your work for a publisher to find. But also you can think about, yes, it's this one title, as we were saying, but how does it fit into the larger literary landscape, but also the news? What is the book talking about that we can fit in with the most recent news cycle? And it doesn't have to be, superficial. It can just be some kind of thoughtful exploration of whatever headline you can think of. But a lot of writers, especially the ones that we publish, are very political and do really want to write about the issues and show how even if they've made a work of art, that there's a message there also to be found. So think about content generation and bother your publisher to help place that content.
I love that. Bother your publisher, yes.
Oh, yes.
Take that to heart. It's a good thing to do. Lauren, other Lauren,
yes.
Lauren 2, Lauren 1, Lauren 2, Lauren 1. Talk to us about when I'm going to let you say it now. The thing about success is not always money, right? And this is Amazon talking, right? It's not always money. Yeah. No, I want to hear this.
Yeah, well, it's true.
It is.
I think everyone in this room always wants the project that they're working on to be a bestseller. That's a great feeling. That's a great success. But in this question of what counts as success and how do you drive visibility for a translation and also translation generally, it doesn't always have to be sales. I think that there are great opportunities in the digital space to gauge impact. That's something that we look closely at Amazon is reader impact, and it's great in terms of customer reviews, Goodreads chatter, getting dialogue going about, yes, an individual title, an individual author, but that also, again, adds context to this larger dialogue of what is the role of translation in the English space. And for some of our books, we've seen comments from readers that express comments about, I didn't realize this book was translated, or I don't read many translations, but I love this book. So sparking interest there is a really fantastic thing that can happen through this digital space.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually the bonding that you're looking for, and it cultivates this. I think it's great. Roland, your other point that I found was so interesting, I have to check on it because I've almost scrolled past it. Here we go. Oh, in fact, this ties in with what we were hearing just now from Lauren 1, or Lauren 2, about raising awareness of books that are not yet translated, right? Yeah. Talk to us about that.
Certainly we at the Starling Bureau, we have a lovely website where we present around 20 books that are as yet untranslated, unpublished in English. And it's following on from the kind of work that a number of other translators have done who blog about books. Katie Derbyshire, who I saw somewhere, she is hiding behind the camera. She had a lovely pioneering blog called Love German Books. And also another one where she went out drinking with German writers. And they were both great at selling the ideas behind selling these books, raising an interest in that. One of our founding members of Starling Bureau, Zoe Perry, has a blog called Gringa Reads, where she's doing the same thing for mainly Brazilian literature. And there are quite a few others. There are other similar collectives to the Starling Bureau, such as Paper Republic, that promotes Chinese literature. And obviously these kind of websites, they're mainly to a large degree aimed at translators and at publishers, but also at more general readers, I think, to a certain extent, people who are interested in literature, and possibly they'll see some of the books that are on there, and that will lead them to exploring perhaps books which are already in publication.
Maybe want to do something. I want to ask about you guys. How many of you here are translators? Aha, terrific, fantastic. How many of you are published as translators? Excellent. How many of you are authors who have been translated? Not enough. We need a lot more of that. How many of you are authors who would like to be translated? Okay, this is a translators conference we're at. Great. It's good to know. Danny, talk to us about, you were talking about, what was it? Wait a minute. I just lost your other point as soon as I started talking. You're the one who says that you wait until you get there before you know what you're going to say, too, right? Yes, great. Yeah, you were talking about a translation diary, which sounded interesting that you had.
Right, so on a couple of occasions I've been asked to keep basically a blog which is just focusing on the process of a single translating a book. So it's not a blog about my life as a translator. It's not something which is kind of, which could possibly run forever. It's just documenting the experience of translating a book from one end to another. So in each case, it was about, I've done it twice, it was about 24 posts, about 24 posts. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying at the beginning about, in a way, it looks like the function of this is to build interest in the book. Actually, it's not at all. I don't really think that people following the blog would then, once I deliver the translation, then anxiously wait for 14 months for publishers to do whatever weird thing publishers do.
I would, Danny. I would wait.
I'm glad you would. So I've made a sale. Thank God for that.
There you go.
But actually, the real benefit to me is there are lots and lots of people who are thinking about the process and who are writing in and saying,
exactly.
how about doing it like this, how about doing it like that. In fact, the first one I did was for a book called Rainy Season by an Angolan writer called Zé Eduardo Agualusa, and I did this sort of 24-post blog following the process of translating the book, which weirdly I discovered he was reading as I was doing it, which hadn't even occurred to me. He just mentioned in passing in an email, by the way, I'm really enjoying your blog. So is my aunt. So my author and his aunt were both reading my blog. But one thing I was really proud of in that case was not only was there quite a lot of engagement as I was writing it, but the publisher actually said, this is itself quite an interesting and valuable thing. Why don't we stick it at the back of the book? So the book actually, the novel came out as maybe a 200-page novel with 60 pages of grumbling from a translator, and I like to think some insight, but mostly grumbling from a translator, so that immediately as part of the reader experience, you don't have to kind of opt into this. As part of the reader experience, there's someone who's saying, by the way, we're glad you like the novel, but there is this other thing happening. It's not selling the book, it's making people understand that there is this detailed, this complicated process that's happening.
I've been fascinated by the process of translators who are working with their authors very closely. I know of one pair who in the final draft spent a week living in the same apartment so that they could go page by page every single day and get it exactly to the point they were both happy. In that case, the author told me, in fact, that he liked the translation better than he liked his original, so it worked.
But there are also authors who depend on their translation in a very different way because they actually refine their originals based on what happens in the translation.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of years ago I commissioned a story from a brilliant writer called Valeria Luiselli, a Mexican novelist, for an anthology I was editing. And we were going to publish it in Spanish and English, and she sent the Spanish to the translator, Christina McSweeney, who is somewhere here. And I wrote to Valeria and said, well, can I have the Spanish at least so I can get working on that? And she said, well, the Spanish won't be finished until Christina has done the English, because the original was somehow contingent upon the process of it being refined by this other person on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. These relationships are incredible. I've also met a couple of authors who do not want to know the translator, don't want to hear from the translator. It's actually, in the cases at least that I've met, an act of faith, an act of trust. They wanted to hand it over and not let themselves and their egos get involved, which I thought showed enormous restraint, more than I could have shown.
Or they don't care.
Or they don't care. Yes. He said that, I didn't say that. Right, Roland. No, it's interesting, and they're all different gradations of how the teams work together or don't.
Well, and to bring that back to promotion, I think it's actually really interesting to see the way authors and translators sometimes work together on the marketing aspect, through social media channels. I think one challenge that authors who are being translated into English, especially for the first time, face is that they don't yet have an established fan base in English through their social media channels, like the way that many English writers do. And that's a wonderful opportunity, depending on the circumstances, for the translator to come in and either help them build out their English social media presence, or for them to work together through their various social media channels. So it can be a very productive cooperation in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think translators are some of our best advocates of really good work today, everywhere. I mean, it's terrific how this is developing more and more as they work together and understand this better, too. One of the things I've been impressed with, and Danny and I have talked about this, is how little competition there seems to be, of the negative kind, between translators, that they support each other in finding jobs, they support each other, and even if you're working in the same language pair, if something just fits your personality better than somebody else's, you might be interested in actually communicating with them and letting them know it's available, because this is meaningful. And I think it probably comes back to you in a good way most of the time when you're willing to be generous. We like to think the world will be generous back, yeah? Yeah, good. Do we have, where is our audio fellow? Hi. Do we have a microphone for the audience? Great. I'd like to know if any of you yet has a question at this point or a comment, particularly about a promotional experience that you've had that seemed to go well. Do you have some ideas about promotion for translation that you'd like to share with us? Here's one. Great. We'll bring a mic to you. Hang on. It's coming. Hang on. This is the great thing about a big crowd. Good job. She got through.
Testing 1, 2. Hello, hi. So I'm a student, so I haven't had a personal experience, but from reading a lot of articles, because I'm writing a dissertation on this, I've kind of found that the best way to promote translated literature is having reviewing space. But so far, a lot of reviewing spaces have been sort of closed down either by, someone who used to be passionate about it is either, I don't remember the names now. I think there was a great woman who passed away, and then there was also, I think his name was Nick something.
Eileen Battersby.
Yes, that exactly. And there used to be a dedicated section in The Guardian where this guy would just review. If it was a great story, it didn't matter whether it was translated or not, he would just review it. But now there are less reviewing spaces, and I think that if we open up those avenues, then that would be a really great way to promote a book. And then on top of that, there's also prizes. I think prizes have a massive impact on the promotion, because you see on a book ooh, Man Booker Prize. I'm ooh, I'm going to go and read that. So I think also including that as well, and emphasizing whether they've won a prize or not, or entering said author and translator into a prize.
Just to add to that, now there are a number of literary prizes now that have their own shadow juries. The most prominent of which is probably managed by a guy called Tony Crawford in Australia, who runs the Man Booker International Prize, Shadow Prize, and they do the prize. They read, I don't know if they read all the books, but they do their own long list, they do a short list. I think they award a winner, the one that they like the most, and then they sort of have some fun seeing which of their picks coincide. I think there's a similar one for the Best Translated Book Award. And of course all this happens online and globally, and does a huge amount not only for the books that are in the running for the actual prize, but the ones that perhaps didn't make the cut.
I can bring your country a compliment from America too. Our National Book Foundation, which gives the National Book Award every year, has just created a new international prize for work in translation. It is only in its first season. It's just been awarded, and they looked at the Booker International Prize, understood the split of the prize between the translator and the author, and did the same thing. And so your model is actually starting to spread around the world and is a good one, and we appreciate it. In the same way that Danny's competition splits between the editor and the translator, which I think is fantastic. Being an editor, I'm a little biased, but I think that's a really generous thought there, Danny. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And actually what Roland was saying was about the discussions about the prize happening online with the shadow jury. Actually, if you have a prize like the Booker, the impact is not actually people who happen to be at this dinner, right, this very, very grand dinner on whichever day it is in May. Yeah. The reason it has impact is because people talk about it in all of the days leading up, exactly, and in all of the days following. And one of the things when we set up the debut prize, which Porter mentioned, is a prize for first-time translation, one of the things we decided very early on was to have a public shortlist, just so that every publisher, every translator, every author involved would basically run a Twitter campaign for us. So fantastic. Rather than us having to do anything, we just said a month beforehand, you are the people who now have a stake in this. And what happened on the night wasn't important per se as an event. Yeah. There isn't very much money for the actual prize, but what happened is an excuse to generate a huge amount of conversation online, yeah, which can then be across the English-speaking world rather than people who happen to be in the V&A Museum on the night of the 21st.
All right. And in that regard, one of the things that I like so much about the translation community, and I think this started here in the UK as well, is the Name the Translator hashtag. It's something that we've taken on at Publishing Perspectives, and in all of our messaging whenever we're dealing with translation topics, we hashtag it Name the Translator too, because we're a little appalled to find how many publishers don't want to put a translator's name on the front of a book. Some of them say it's so that they can sell the book better, so that people will be tricked into thinking it's not a translation. Sounds a little bad. I want them to have credit. I want you guys to have credit. And so we think that naming the translator is important. And again, if you just start using that hashtag, you'll get a discussion going. Danny's right. This kind of thing is like underbrush. It just starts spreading like mad. It's wonderful, you know?
And I would just add to that I think that campaigns like the Name the Translator campaign, when done well, which means that you don't shout at the publisher, you give them a cheeky little nod. I think it makes the publisher realise how much translators can be involved in actually promoting the book as well, because they see us in the same digital space.
Yeah, and by connection with that, to your point about the problem of coverage and it declining at certain points and then sometimes rising, I hope it's coming back. The more hubbub you make, the better, because you are readers, you are listeners, you are viewers, you are customers of the media. And so don't ever just sit there and sigh and go, good Lord, they used to have reviews and they don't now. Do something about it. Make a little noise, nicely, as Roland is reminding us, but be willing to speak up for yourselves. I think it's important to do, and if not, you guys who, right? Yeah. Yeah? Another point from the house? Oh, here's somebody over here. Do we have the mic? Thank you. Easier to get to this time.
Oh, hi. I just want to learn the view of the panelists about the translation grant, because now lots of countries like China, Turkey, Russia, they offer translation grant for the translator, for the publishing house. And what our approach should be, like these countries where the freedom of expression is quite low? Shall we actually translate their books or take a position? Or how do we basically select them, as a translator or as a publisher?
Who wants that?
It's worth saying that what you're describing is less high risk for a translator than for an author. And a lot of the time, the concern is for an author who may still be in the country where they're writing. It connects to the funding question as well, because there are plenty of countries that have funding bodies to promote their literature, but they have a very restricted view of what their literature should look like in an acceptable way. And this is a number of countries, including now some countries in Europe, where it's easy to get funding to promote their literature so long as the literature is not seditious, so long as the literature is not from a certain community, is not about a certain subject. And it's one of the reasons why actually we have to think about the funding as a very broad picture in the receiving country here, or the US particularly, and not just depend on funding that comes from specific countries, not only because some countries are better funded than others and it's easier to get money from country X than country Y, but also country Y may have lots of money but it may not want to support certain kinds of writing. So funding from a lot of individual countries is very useful, but there have to be ways of making sure that doesn't become a restriction on the kinds of writers that actually have a voice internationally. Because it's a very commonly used tool by a regime who says we're going to promote the writing of this country or that country. But obviously you know what kind of writers we really want to pay for. And they're not the ones we just put in prison.
Anyone else? If you'll be in Frankfurt in October, I should tell you that Norway is our guest of honor. They have one of the biggest translation funding programs in the world. In 2018, they went to something like 637 translation grants, just enormous. That's a lot of books, and that's a lot of material coming out of Norway, too. They're all writing. It's kind of wonderful. But I like these programs, as you say, when there aren't strings attached, but you do have to be careful with that. Who else? I think I saw a hand in the back, yeah? No? Yes, there's somebody. There we go. On the way.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm an editor and I'm really passionately committed to publishing, specifically philosophy and translation. And I wondered if maybe, because you've mainly been talking about fiction, if you could mention if there is a difference for theory and for non-fiction, and if that difference is relevant. And also just talk about, you mentioned the process of translation and making that more visible, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about strategies for doing that.
I didn't hear the question. Can you say the question again for us and speak up a little bit? We're having trouble hearing up here.
Okay.
Good. That sounds good.
First part of the question, translating philosophy, is it different from literature? If so, are there different strategies? Second part, making the translator's work visible. You talked a little bit about that, and I was wondering if there were kind of other ways of highlighting that labour as added value rather than something to hide.
I think the first question, it comes down a bit maybe to the difference between translating fiction and non-fiction, possibly. Sort of. I mean, any text, any book, any genre has its own codes, its own rules. It's, so if you're translating a particular specialist subject, and certainly in the case of non-fiction, it's more often about getting across, communicating particular ideas, so making sure you understand as a translator those ideas clearly yourself, and I guess paying attention to certain vocabulary, certain terminology. I mean, when it comes to something like philosophy, there are a lot of concepts that may come from Greek, or even if it's more modern, from French, and there'll be a particular vocabulary that can seem quite opaque, possibly. If it's a book that's more popular philosophy, then maybe you're going to have to, in a sense, doubly translate, because you're translating the language, but possibly some of the concepts as well. Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was going to touch on the second point, so if you...
Yeah, well, so on that first point, before Lauren has a much better answer for the second answer, obviously, second question. If we're talking about the promotion of these things, it's a question about market, and actually, in a way, it's nothing to do with translation. It's to do with if it's a work which is from an academic house which is in the academic space, that is marketed in a completely different way to something which is published for the trade. And actually, the translation, I think, is not the issue in a way there. That if you have a work of philosophy for the academic space rather than a work of philosophy for the trade market, you'll have already, as a publisher, a much clearer idea of who your audience is. There'll be a fairly natural ceiling to the size of that audience. And we were talking about this at an event yesterday, actually. On the whole, one of the issues that I think we find dealing with certain publishers who are working with academic work specifically is almost a reluctance to do very much in the way of promotion, because they kind of know we have 474 people who are going to buy this, but we kind of know who they're going to be. There is nothing we can do to make this book sell to 10,000 people. We don't want it to sell to 300 because we know that we have, we know who the universities are, we know how many people are working in the field, that kind of thing. But I think there is often a reluctance in certain bits of academic publishing to see the potential of actually doing some promotion, having some promotional spend, sending the author on a tour which isn't just seminars in the place she or he is already doing seminars, and thinking about the possibility of expanding the readership of the book. I think the translation doesn't help and shouldn't be a problem either. But it feels to me like such a different way of thinking about a publisher's relationship to a reader, or a readership rather. And the translation is immaterial, as so often. Translation is completely irrelevant.
Well, to touch on the second point that you raised about visibility, this isn't specifically for academic texts, but it does touch on something that I think about a lot, which is this concept of discoverability also. And I think this is important for publishers to think about the ever so dry but ever so important concepts of metadata and BISACs, and making sure that the books are captured in all of the various systems and all the various platforms in ways that if a reader is interested in that topic, they will find it if they do some digging. I think promotion is a great first step. But that second step of also making sure that it surfaces in the right way, the data is correct. And in that sense, I actually, at Amazon, we definitely ascribe to the name the translator philosophy and put translator names on covers. And I think that is actually important for discoverability. I think everyone in this room has a great sense of translation and knows about fabulous resources like Chad Post's database to find comprehensive lists of translations. But when you think about the average reader who maybe has stumbled into one translation and has this interest peaked in global literature, how can they go about easily identifying other translations that they might want to read? And having the translator's name on the cover, on the detail page, in the metadata is one cue for them to kind of capture that global readership. So again, that's not specific to academic texts, but I do think starting with understanding who your readers are and then making sure that all the information is there so that they can find the books is really important.
that's an excellent point. How many of you know Simon Bruni, the translator? Yeah? I will read anything Simon's translated because I know how much I like his work. I want to know what he's thinking about next, what he's been working on, so I'll watch him. Same for Danny. I'm always following his work, several people. And I think that those of us who are interested in reading translation take a certain pride in knowing who a translator is and following what they're doing. There's a bit of a project value to it. And you want to tap into that project value and get those people coming with you. Yeah? Makes sense? Yeah. Lauren, what is Feminist Press doing next? What is your most exciting project you have coming?
Well, it's not exactly a translation, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, so bear with me. It's a book that's coming out in March next year. It's called Fiebre Tropical, a novel. And it's by Juliana Delgado Lopera. She's based in the Bay Area. She's a queer activist and a writer. She's from Colombia. So it's a novel, but it's her own immigration story from Bogota to Miami. And it's a queer coming-of-age story where her family falls deep into evangelical culture in Miami, including Christian salsa and baptisms for the dead. And the protagonist, Francisca, falls in love with the preacher's daughter, Carmen. And so Francisca accepts Jesus into her heart, starts dancing Christian salsa to get closer to Carmen. But what's really exciting is that Juliana actually had a TED Talk in January specifically about Spanglish. And the book makes extensive use of code switching and Spanglish. And I do read Spanish, so it's been a joy to edit, but I really do believe this is the future of American literature. People always ask me, oh, but did she write it in English first? Or did she write it in Spanish first? And I was like, she wrote it the way she speaks. This is her language. Yeah. And so I'm really excited about that project, sort of related to translation, but also, very excited.
You have to send it to me. I'm based in Florida, so I'm very close to what you're talking about right there. Who else has a point about promotion you want to make? Yes, please.
Hey, so Lauren Hook, Feminist Press has, I think, one of the best Instagram accounts of the handful of publishers that I follow.
I'll have to tell my coworker, Lucia. She'll be thrilled.
Yeah, well, so many of them, they're photos of books, and you guys make it not that
boring. She makes memes as well.
Yeah. And then also Lauren Edwards, you mentioned Goodreads briefly, and I wondered if you guys could talk about these two platforms for the promotion of individual works and also for sort of raising awareness about the craft of translation.
Absolutely. Goodreads is fabulous. Goodreads is almost like a book club turned into a website. So, in terms of the influence of customer reviews, reader response, I think that Goodreads is a place that many people go to get that feedback first these days. And so making sure that a book is available on Goodreads, that people can add it to their libraries, that it's ready to grab all of that chatter that might be happening around a release is fantastic. I think that that's something that authors also really look to. Kind of more formalized press reviews are wonderful, always appreciated. But coming back to my original point about success not necessarily meaning best-selling success all the time. For an author who had their first book published into English and then they're able to go on and see English reader response in a forum like Goodreads, we've heard can be incredibly satisfying and an incredible mark of success. So I just think it's a really valuable forum. I encourage everyone to use it. I encourage everyone to check it out and to be familiar with all the different features because as Jerry brings up, it can be a really great promotional avenue.
Yeah, I'm told a lot how important Goodreads is, and so, by our distributor, for example. But also for translators, I talk about raising visibility. You should get your own work out there, but you could also write a lot of great book reviews, and then, someone will owe you a favor, and then there you go. But yeah, great for Goodreads. For Instagram, we've done a lot of things on Twitter and on Instagram that I think are kind of successfully communicate the culture of our office and our list. And we do that in lots of different ways. We definitely post pictures of books, in the grass, in the sun somewhere, or whatever people are doing. But we also do things like an author takeover, which is really fun. And I really want to do a translator takeover as well, basically handing over an author or a translator the login and being this day, 24 hours, like I want you doing stories, I want you doing posts about everything you're doing. So talk about a virtual translator diary. I think that could be really interesting. So we do a lot of stories as well. Like if I had a colleague here, hopefully they would be like live tweeting or taking a stupid video of me speaking right now, and just generating content that way. And if we're lucky enough to have a translator, like we had Kit Maud from Buenos Aires come to the New York office in the fall. He translated a novella by Harmonia Summers called The Naked Woman, and Harmonia, passed away in the 90s. So we did an interview of him in the office, and it was on Instagram Live and Facebook Live. But that's also something we can reference going forward. We also generate a lot of silly content like listicles, and so like for Mars, that speculative fiction book I talked about, we were like, what was a book that recently had you shook, that gave you nightmares and disturbed you? And it's something that interns can generate content for our website, staffers too, and so folks can get to know us. But it's all in promotion of the book. So trying to think outside of the typical book review, right? The typical coverage, and kind of also find a way to generate community by having folks feel like they're a part of our staff.
Great advice. Another couple of points. We have just a few more minutes left. Yep, right here. Handily together, that's nice.
I don't know, this may be totally off the point, but is there a difference between promoting translations for children and translations for adults? I mean, many children's books actually have been translated, but nobody ever knows that they were translated. Pippi Longstocking, for a start, not an English classic. Today, we're beginning to see a bit more. Do you think there is still there market resistance to having the translator acknowledged and on the page? It makes me very cross when they're not, because I do follow them.
Who wants that? Danny?
I have views on this subject. You'd be surprised to know. I think there is a difference. I think there are problems with children's books in translation which adult books in translation have solved over the last few years. And hopefully it will get better for children's books in the same way that it has done for adult books. But I think one of the issues is to do specifically with promotion, and to do with the fact that the promotion of children's books has so much in this country become about authors schlepping around the country, doing 5 school visits a week, doing 200 festivals a year. I mean, there is so much that depends now on the author being present, the author being living, the author being willing to drive up and down the country constantly. It's very, very hard, as you know, to be a children's writer in this country now and say, well, I'm not going to do any promotional event at all. I'm not going to have any kind of online contact, any digital contact with my reader or anything like that. Even more than adult books, children's books in this country have become about the author promoting the book themselves. And so if your author is 5,000 miles away and doesn't speak English and can't, pop into the local schools to do an assembly or to do a few workshops or to do the local festivals, it becomes almost prohibitive because, as Lauren was saying, it's partly about thinking beyond the normal ways of promoting books. But we have, over the last 10 years or so, found ourselves in children's publishing in the promotion of children's books so narrowed to this one idea that unless you are dead and classic or you are J.K. Rowling or David Walliams, your job is basically to schlep around the country selling your books, which you will write presumably on the train between school visits. But that particular model of promoting books in the children's publishing world in the UK is, I think, one of the things that has mitigated against a kind of flowering of children's books in translation in the way that we have seen quite healthily for adult books in the last decade or so.
And I think there was another question right here. Yeah? Let's get the microphone to you. Thanks. There you go.
You mentioned excerpts in Words Without Borders and Asymptote and places like that. I'm a magazine editor myself of a journal called Sand, and I was really wondering how you work with these excerpts. How do you interact with various, whether it's blogs or whether it's traditional literary journals, to get people to read a little piece about it of it before it appears. One example, which is not from translation, was the story Cat Person from The New Yorker last year that got so much online attention, and I think having this kind of little sample in advance in the public eye might have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, even if we're just talking books written in English, short story collections, it's almost essential that the majority of the collection already be published and, findable, discoverable online. And Yeah, I mean, it's something, even if, normally if I'm acquiring a book, maybe, a translator's already worked to slot a portion of it online already. But if not, then, we have even more content to sort of like place in different, venues. And obviously we want to hit the translation community, something like Words Without Borders. But yeah, if we can, go a little bigger too, maybe get some teen Vogue coverage, like what have you. But I think it's helpful because people, they want to get a taste of what they're reading. And I think it really does lead to sales a lot of times. Or at least generates a review or content or just more conversation. So then, that's something we can link to. That's something I can share with a publisher here at London. Like, I don't know. I do think it is helpful. But same thing, though, with the op-eds. People want to hear from the authors, too, and from the translators, too. Like, who are the people that have made these great stories?
That's a great answer. Yeah, we love Words Without Borders, by the way, very much. I hope you're all looking at it. At Publishing Perspectives, we cover it every month. We think Karen and the group are just doing a terrific job. I think we have time for one more. Does somebody have one more comment or question? Here it is, right behind you, not too far. There you go. Thanks.
Actually, it's two quick questions. One is, one of you mentioned that that we're encouraged to use Goodreads. As a translator, I can hardly go to Goodreads and promote the book I've translated, so how... who should do that? Should the publisher be doing it, or do you have any suggestions for that? And
you as the translator can, by telling everyone you know in your network, a large BCC, to read your book and review it and star it on Goodreads. Yeah. I swear that translates into sales. It blew my mind, too.
Yeah. Okay. And the other question is, Danny, you mentioned blog tour. It was also mentioned yesterday at the Translator Symposium. What is a blog tour? Can you tell us a bit more about it? Maybe I'm a bit backward here, but I never heard of it until yesterday.
It's something which some publicists will use as a tool to promote a book, where basically you'll have the author for a week, and on Monday they'll do an interview on so-and-so's blog, and on Tuesday they'll do a guest post on this other person's blog, and on Wednesday an excerpt for the book will appear on this other person's blog. So there is basically, it's partly to do with content creation, original content creation, but means basically that there's a sort of curated tool, but it only happens in different online spaces. And in some cases, a book I published last year, translation of mine was last year, one of the stops, it was the author doing this blog tour, but one of the days was someone got an interview with the translator. The short straw, but you get the real author most of the time, and they got me on Thursday, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. I'd like to invite all of you back tomorrow afternoon at about this hour, at 2:15, a little bit earlier. I'm going to be speaking with Demian Vitanza, speaking of Norway, who has an Italian name, but he's from Norway, and he's written a magnificent book called This Life or the Next. And it has to do with a jihadist. It is a fascinating example of political material right now that's very powerfully written and beautifully translated. And his editor is going to be with us, Elizabeth DeNove. So I hope you'll join us both at that time. Many other good programs going on here at Literary Translation Center, so stay with us as much as you can. Thank you for your good questions, and thanks to the panel for the wonderful comments. We appreciate it all.
Thanks.